Okay, so the next question is about how I'm like contaminated by each woman when I create their choreography. It's very true. Each woman is really different, and that's a goal of mine. I like the idea of when I create the solo, I like to think about what the woman would like herself. Like, what would she like to see performed to represent her? Or what would she like to perform herself, even? And it's really dependent on the research that I do of her and then where that leads me to. So there are lots of different examples. I'll just go through a couple. So Elizabeth I, that's a pretty personal relationship because when I was 12, I was like obsessed with Elizabeth I. And at the same time, coincidentally, I was obsessed with dance notation. So I used to like try and invent my own dance notation, and I used to take my solos, like my little ballet solos, and write them out in this notation that I was inventing. So this is a happy coincidence because in the time of Elizabeth I, dance notation was like a thing that quite a few choreographers and dance teachers were experimenting with. They made quite a lot of progress with dance notation then. So for Elizabeth, I thought I could take one of those notations that I made when I was 12 and I could use it as like a choreographic cue or a score to make a new dance with, because obviously I have absolutely no idea what the notation means. So I kind of just used its symbols and lines as a guide to make new movement. And then to that movement, I added the rhythm of a dance called La Volta, which was Elizabeth I's favorite dance. So this solo is really based on notation, dance notation. For some other ones, like something totally different, there's a couple. I put them together, Artemisia Gentileschi and Francesca Caccini. So Artemisia was a painter and Francesca was a composer, and they lived at the same time in Italy. And this is actually the only one that I improvise with. So I just gave myself some basic ideas, images, and emotions connected to Artemisia and the things that she went through. I think I told you about how she was raped by her art master, and then she was like one of the first women to take a man to trial for rape. And in recent years, well, not so recent, like in the 20th century, there was quite a lot of debate about whether the art of Artemisia, which usually portrays really strong leading women and often really violent women, like with knives cutting off the head of men, like whether this was just a reaction to the trauma that she went through being raped, or like where does it come from. So yeah, when I do this improvisation for Artemisia, I like think that I have daggers in my hands, and I guess I just like think about dancing violently or with like anger in me. But I also dance to the music of Francesca, which is like super lively, and it gives me a lot of cues in itself, like the rhythm, the melody, the volume, things like that. So yeah, that one's different to the others because it's not set, like I improvise. What's another one I could talk about? Sappho. I can talk about Sappho. So sometimes when I research the woman, I find one really small element about her. So, for example, Sappho was a poet and a musician in ancient Greece, and she invented this this thing called the Sapphic stanza, which was a way of saying a poem. So basically, it's like every syllable has a different pitch or volume, and it's like all written in a pattern. So if you put this pattern over your poem and over the syllables of your poem, it tells you like when you should raise your voice and when you should lower your voice. So I took the Sapphic stanza as not about volume, but as about movements that go up and movements that go down. And then I took another poet and musician, so I chose Patti Smith because I love Patti Smith, and I just chose one of her songs, Dancing Barefoot, and I put the Sapphic stanza on top of the lyrics to the song to make a phrase of movement that's all about going up and going down. So yeah, it's pretty fun to do that one, but also I find it interesting because it came from such a simple idea. Another one a bit like that is Nellie Bly. So she was a journalist, and I was just thinking about the ability that journalism has to distort the truth. So like if a newspaper wants to sell a story, what can they do to the truth to make it sellable, you know, like pick up on certain parts or gloss over things. I guess it's a bit like Photoshop, really, like to change the truth. So what I did for Nelly was improvise in the studio one day, like a really messy, loose, kind of rough dance that I would not be able to replicate again. And I filmed it, and then I spent a long time trying to learn this dance. And as I was learning it, it naturally became something like cleaned and polished. And then I tried to make it as precise as possible and, yeah, like to airbrush it. So when I perform Nelly, I do my dance as well as I can, and on the screen you see the original like photo booth video of me doing this messy dance. So yeah, those are some examples of how the research of the woman brought me to certain ideas that let me make things in the studio. Also, I should mention, I remember we talked a lot about how like sometimes it doesn't make sense for me to make dance. And I remember talking about how that's like quite a problem that I face, because often I feel like the things that I can write have more to say than what I could say if I dance. Like I can express more in my words than I can in my dance, and I'm not alone in that feeling. Like that's something that quite a lot of choreographers have to find their way around. it's important to say that, like, I don't mean just any choreographer. I mean ones like me who were working with like more political or academic ideas, because, you know, it makes sense for subject matter like that to be spoken about with words. So to then turn it or transform it into dance can be difficult, and it can often feel like you're doing something weaker or watering down what you could otherwise say. So sometimes when I research a woman, I find that dance isn't the right way to present her. Like, it wouldn't make sense for me to do a dance for her, and instead I'd rather speak about her. So like for Sojourner Truth, I literally just say a speech about who she is, and then at the end ask the audience to make a vote, because Sojourner fought for the women's vote. Yeah, and this felt like a stronger way to present who she was than to do a dance about her. So yeah, it's really dependent on who the woman is.